When we talk about the most successful countries in the world, we kind of always see the same names popping up at the top of every list. But what if I told you that the official story, the one based on all the numbers we see, is missing a huge piece of the puzzle? So let's dig in and find out what's really going on.
Let me just ask you this. Is your country as developed as you think it is? It sounds like a pretty simple question, right? But the answer, well, it's way more complicated than you'd expect. Because it all comes down to how you measure developed. And the standard report card for nations, it might be giving out some grades that don't quite tell the whole story for everyone living there.
Okay, so how do we officially rank countries? Well, for decades, the go-to metric has been something called the Human Development Index, or HDI. Just think of it like the world's official report card.
So what's actually in this HDI? It basically boils a country's success down to three big ideas. First, are people living long, healthy lives? Second, do they have access to education and knowledge? And third, do they have a decent standard of living? The index just wraps all of that up into one single score.
And if you look at the top of the class for 2023, no real surprises here, right? You've got Iceland, Norway, Switzerland, all the usual suspects. So based on this, you'd think, wow, life must be fantastic for pretty much everyone in these places. But, and this is a big but, this is exactly where the story starts to get really interesting.
You see, the HDI has this one kind of fundamental flaw, and it's a huge one. It's based on averages, and averages, as you're about to see, can be incredibly misleading.
Okay, look at it this way. In both of these scenarios, the average wealth is exactly the same, $50 million. But the reality for the people living in them could not be more different. Scenario A? That's a pretty equal society. Scenario B shows extreme inequality. Same average, wildly different worlds. And that's the crucial point here. The HDI can give a country a really high score even if a tiny group of people are hoarding all the benefits while lots of other people are getting left behind. It tells you how big the pie is, but it tells you absolutely nothing about how the slices are actually handed out.
So, is there a way to get a more honest picture? You bet there is. We just need a better tool. And luckily, one already exists. It's a way of adjusting that official score to account for the reality of inequality on the ground. It's this thing called the Inequality Adjusted Human Development Index, or IHDI for short. What it does is it takes that original HDI score and then it applies a discount based on how unequally things like health, education, and income are actually spread around the population. It's a measure of the real level of human development people are actually experiencing. Now that gap between the perfect average score of the HDI and the real-world score of the IHDI is called the overall loss. The easiest way to think about it is like an inequality penalty. The higher that penalty, the less a country's prosperity is actually being shared with its people.
And to see just how massive this penalty can be, look at South Africa. It loses over a third of its potential development score, 35.7%, just because of inequality. That's a staggering penalty, and it shows a massive gap between the country's potential on paper and the reality for so many of its citizens.
So, what happens when we re-rank every country using this more honest yardstick? Well, the whole global leaderboard gets thrown into a blender. Some of the high flyers come tumbling down, and some of the underdogs, they absolutely soar.
Let's start with the countries that drop. Take Panama. On the standard HDI, it's ranked a very respectable 59th in the world. But as soon as you factor in its internal inequality, boom, it plummets 19 spots. I mean, that is a massive fall.
And hey, don't think this is just an issue for developing nations. The United States, ranked 17th in the world on the standard metric, drops a whole 12 places once you account for inequality. That's actually one of the biggest drops among all highly developed countries.
So what's the story here? It's pretty clear, right? These countries, they look great on paper with these high average scores, but the actual benefits of all that development, the long lives, the good education, the high income, they're just not being spread around very evenly among the population.
But okay, enough of the drops, because this re-ranking isn't bad news for everyone. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Kyrgyzstan has a pretty modest HDI rank, way down at 117, but when you look at it through the inequality lens, it jumps a mind-blowing 26 places up the rankings. Or how about Czechia? It's already considered a highly developed country, ranked 29th. But it does such a good job of sharing its development that it climbs another 14 spots, leapfrogging countries that actually have a higher average score.
What this tells us is that these countries are really punching above their weight. Sure, they may not have the absolute highest average income or life expectancy in the world, but what they do have, they make sure it reaches a much, much broader slice of their society.
All right, so now that we've completely reshuffled the global rankings, what does this all mean? What have we really learned? Well, it's all about looking past the flashy headlines and getting beyond that one simple, seductive number, the average.
Let's break down the key takeaways. First, that national averages can hide a lot more than they reveal. The IHDI, on the other hand, gives us a much truer picture of how well-being is actually distributed. And this shows something really crucial. Having high development is not the same thing as having shared development. And that inequality penalty we talked about, it's real, and it is holding so many nations back from their true potential.
When you boil it all down, this whole data story is really telling us one thing. True national success, real development, it can't just be measured by the total amount of money or the average lifespan. It has to be measured by how many people actually get to share in that success.
And that really leaves us with one final big question to think about. When you're judging how successful a country is, what really matters more to you? An impressive-looking average score, or a society where prosperity, health, and knowledge are things that everyone genuinely gets to share?